Hi everybody, Michael Macniak here. I'm the co-creator of the Guardian Model and the author of Saving Melissa, the 7 C's for Curing the Mental Health System. We're continuing our dialogue around establishing best practices for fiduciaries who are in a position of making decisions for others who may otherwise not be able to do so. We're continuing with the topic of least restrictive, and this is the third of 3 short videos on the topic. So we're going to get right into it. What I'm talking about in least restrictive this time is the least restrictive housing options that are available to individuals. Fiduciaries have a mandate. They have an affirmative duty to establish and maintain housing on the behalf of individuals. What housing we want to provide, what shelter we want to provide, is always an issue of concern. Today, we are faced more and more with a lack of beds, a lack of places for people to stay. We have a lack of resources, and everywhere we have a lack of dollars and lack of assets. So when it comes to housing, we need to be very particular and very careful about how we go about choosing where we want somebody to live, obviously when those individuals are not able to make those decisions on their own. Now, a least restrictive environment applies to all levels of care. So the inquiry is, if I place my mother in a housing X, is that the least restrictive setting? Can she do okay in a less restrictive setting or a less restrictive setting? And on we go. And it can start at the very top, which would be inpatient psychiatric unit, right? So you're committed or you're staying inpatient at a psychiatric facility, and we can go all the way down from a step-down program to, let's say, to a nursing home, to a skilled nursing facility, to a group home, to an assisted living center, to independence and living in an apartment in a community. Least restrictive environment, least restrictive housing is the goal. Now, least restrictive does not mean not restrictive. It's important to keep this distinction in mind because some folks need a level of supervision to maintain safety in the community. And as a fiduciary, your number one priority is the safety and maintenance of an individual. So again, least restrictive does not mean not restrictive. Sometimes restrictive is a necessity. Least restrictive also does not mean that we're forced to create new setting types. I have seen courts and advocates take this argument far afield. And what I mean by that is this, that obviously the goal is to live independently out in the community with resources wrapped around everybody so that we can live free and unencumbered and we can come and go as we please. That's our goal. That's our dream for everybody. However, in certain circumstances, individuals, due to their mental incapacity, simply cannot do that. They need some kind of structure and they need some kind of oversight. So at what point, in terms of maybe a balancing act, put people on a scale, at what point do we say, you providers need to provide more so that this person could have less restrictions? And at what point does this balancing act get to the point where we're basically creating all new programs using all kinds of resources that we don't have and fictitious dollars that we don't have to create a program for an individual? I think we might have to redo this one. Yes. All right, let's start over. Shit.
You stumbled a lot.
I know. This is a tough one. Hi everybody, I'm Michael Macniak. I'm the co-creator of the Guardian Model and the author of Saving Melissa, the 7 C's for Curing the Mental Health System. Today I'm continuing our dialogue of best practices for fiduciaries, which is very important in terms of setting an overarching or a common uniform theme that we can all use in discussing the goals of a fiduciary and once a fiduciary is established and appointed. The ongoing topic at this point is least restrictive, so we're going to get right into it. Today's least restrictive discussion goes to the issue of environment. When we have a mandate, we have a duty to provide housing and shelter for individuals, we as a fiduciary need to ensure that whatever housing option we choose is the least restrictive environment for the person that we are choosing the housing for. Now, least restrictive inquiry could go all the way from the very top to the very bottom. So obviously the most restrictive environment would be inpatient psychiatric unit or even inpatient hospitalization. And then perhaps the next step down would be to a halfway house or a transitional facility within the same hospital. The next step after that may be a skilled nursing facility for rehab. Then we can get into group homes, assisted living, and finally independent apartments would be the lowest form, the lowest restrictive environment that we could come up with. Basically independent living in the environment, no resources, etc. The goal of anybody making housing determinations has to be that least restrictive environment. Least restrictive does not mean, folks, that it is not restrictive. Some individuals in some cases will demand that supervision be in place, that certain providers be in place, and certain services are in place. So on some level, even on a low end restriction in terms of housing, there may be environmental and social agencies that are coming in and necessarily being involved in terms of the day-to-day living of an individual. So while individuals need some level of supervision to be safe, that goes to least restrictive. And again, least restrictive does not mean not restrictive. Also, least restrictive does not mean that we are forced to create new, elaborate, overexpensive, and unrealistic setting types. I've seen advocates and courts confuse this in terms of the statutes. What their argument is that if we take any amount of money and pour it into any case or any individual's care, we can create an ultimately least restrictive environment wherein they could be free to move about and function in the community, and if they fall, we have the proper services in place to catch them. We are forever their safety net. I think that flies in the face of the intent of the least restrictive language. Again, if we had all those resources, it would be wonderful to create this fictitious type of service program, but we don't. And for an advocate to advocate such, and for a judge to judge on such, is over the top. It's unrealistic. It's overstepping the bounds of what the jurisdiction is. I'm not at all trying to say that we should not think outside the box. I think we should always bring all resources to bear, as you will know if you know about my work. But at some point we have to get realistic about what resources are available in this particular community to meet this particular individual's needs. So that's why I say least restrictive does not mean not restrictive, and least restrictive does not mean that we're forced to create new settings and new types of settings. We need to consider the environment and available resources and safety, all balanced against what? The best interest of an individual. That is how we make informed, good decisions as a fiduciary. So this will conclude our least restrictive discussion. I thank you all again for listening and watching. Check out my other videos and discussions on this topic, and I welcome your feedback and dialogue on this and anything else that you may be interested in talking about. And now my lovely and talented assistant will take care of the